here. So we have a log analyst workspace, which I told you is for capturing, for inspecting all our APIs and the performance. Storage account is for actually physically pushing the files out. This is fairly new. Log analyst workspace is basically like a Splunk or one of those low-level logging platforms where you can actually inspect all the logs that come into your backend system. And we'll have some time, we'll look at that as well. So now the function app is deployed. Hopefully this should be finished. Okay, that was successful. All right, so the next thing we have to do, I even noticed that when we deploy the function app, it's actually created one down here for us. So now the next thing we have to do is deploy the actual code itself, right? So there's two ways to deploy, right? You can deploy from a local machine, which I don't really recommend, but you can deploy from your local machine. You can deploy the function app here. You click this button. I'm going to go ahead and deploy, but you do ask you a couple questions, and then you can hit that deploy button. It's going to build and deploy, but that's not what we're doing today, right? So my preference is to do what we call a CI/CD pipeline, which is more common across most businesses today, and I recommend going that approach. We're just going to do a basic CI/CD that allows us to deploy a code, but any dependency things that come with your code base, you can deploy that separately in another pipeline. So we're going to have function app itself, which is the main guy that's going to be doing all the orchestration and moving off things around and doing ETL for us. It's pretty empty right now because we just put a function app container out there, and it has an operating system that's running on, which is Windows, but there's nothing out here. But we need to actually deploy the code itself. So they have a nice thing called a deployment center. This is what it looks like in favorites, but this is where you can find it. And all the deployment center is just saying where do you want to pull your code from, what repository are you using. So in this case, we're going to be pulling it from a GitHub repository because that's what I'm using. Then I'm already authenticated behind the scenes, and so it's just going to pick up my organization. Yours might be different, and then obviously the repositories in that organization is what is actually pulling down. So I can actually pick the one I'm trying to deploy, which is that one. And then here it gives you the option to create a user identity. And the reason why that's needed is because it needs access to be able to push the code out to a push the code out here from GitHub. So this credential is created as a proxy between the GitHub and the portal.azure.com. And once I save this, what it's going to do is going to actually open up. You're going to go into GitHub, push the YAML file out there, and then it's going to then spin off a deployment. So it does two things: it creates the file, writes it creates the file, and then does deployment in one shot. And this is a good getting started. So if you're trying to get started, I recommend going this route. If you're comfortable in YAML, you can actually build that yourself. So now that's out there. Just give it a second. See, it's starting to deploy the code already. And if I click the logs here, this will take me back to GitHub. And this is the YAML file that was generated for us, and he checked it in for us as well. And it's just basically a couple of lines. It has a client ID and secrets, which is basically represents the user identity, which we were talking about. And if I go back, you will see that the build has kicked off already. And his job is just basically to make sure that it can deploy the code out into our environment. Now, this will take a couple minutes, maybe about 4 or 5 minutes, because it's a brand new build and there's nothing in the function app yet. So while this is going, we can actually go back into our resource group and start and go into our documentation and look at what we need to build out, right? So let's go down to our builds here. So right now, this function app is getting built out. Once that's done, we can actually build out two things, right? We can build out the service bus and the SQL database while the function app is getting deployed. So let's just go back and do that. So when you want to build any resource, the first thing you do is go into your resource group. Then you go, there's a create button at the resource group level, and now it keeps you in that resource group. And then you go to the marketplace here, then you can type in basically almost like Google or Apple Play Store, Google Play Store or Apple Marketplace. You can actually go in and actually type in what you're looking for. In this case, I'm doing Azure SQL. And then we select the first one, select this. And this is going to house all the data we're going to be importing through data integration. Now with SQL, you get a couple of flavors, right? So you do have three options: the database, the managed instance, and virtual machines. Now they're actually what they say they are. So if you really want to continue in Azure and you don't want to make any changes from on-prem to Azure, this is the best route to go. It does provision a virtual machine for you with RDP access, plus it installs the operating system and it's the version of SQL Server that you have on-prem in Azure. And then you can bring your own license and you can get going. And everything doesn't change, it just works like a data center. This is slightly different because this doesn't give you the option to install have your Windows operating system or SQL database option. You just have to choose what Microsoft offers. But you can bring your database and you can run SQL agents as well. But this one is basically completely native. Microsoft owns everything. So you don't own networking, you don't own anything. Microsoft takes care of this for you. So this is one I'm going to be using today because it offers a lot of capabilities that these two don't have, and it's one of the ways of showing how we can elastically scale to grow according to load. I'm going to use the same training we're going to create a database first. Well, training 2022, 2024, 1218. All right, so we're going to select we also have to we have a database name and we have to select the server for the database to reside on. There's none that exists, so we have to create a brand new one. So I hit the create button here. It's going to bring me to this wizard. I paste in the same name. We have to keep the same location. I recommend keeping your locations all the same. For all your resources should live in one location because of cross-region traffic. And then there you have latency issues as well going across different regions. Authentication methods are interesting. You have like the Microsoft Active Directory or now called Intra. That's if you're in an enterprise environment and you don't have any, everything is on Intra. I recommend doing number one. That's the default. And two is basically a mixed mode where you have SQL and you have Intra. It's all these in a scenario where you want to have an account that's logged in. You want to have an SA account or a SQL account that's logged into Intra. And then you also want to support Intra at the same time. Microsoft has a mixed mode. But because we're not using Intra today, we're just going to create our own username and password for the environment. So I'm going to create that. Then we'll hit OK. And this is going to actually, it's going to flip for a second here. And here we go. So we have compute and storage, very important. I mean, the next step is to set up a compute and storage. If you don't set up a compute and storage and you just go with the defaults, Microsoft is going to provision two cores, 32 gig. It might be not enough, or you need more or less. It doesn't really matter. But the key thing that you need to understand all your options, right? So if you look at what we have a plethora of options here, and this screen can get confusing because there's so many different ways to provision this solution, and the pricing also varies depending on what you choose. The out of the box for most clients, they like vCores because they're kind of used to understand how vCores work. It's less complicated, so they just go with what they're used to on-prem. So they might have 16 gig or 14 gig 14 cores or 16 cores, depending on what it is, they'll just match what they have on prem and just spin up. But I recommend always going to your tier level, service tier level, and choose and Microsoft does recommend this, and you go with a standard budget friendly. The whole interface changes, the pricing changes significantly, and this can be like a getting started, where you just pay $14 a month, and that way you can leave this running and you don't have to worry about incurring a lot of costs. I need about 200 for the data we're doing today. This brings me to more business ready solution. So I'm going to use 200 DTUs. You can read up on DTUs on your own time, but basically that's the way they manage IO and memory and CPU combined. I'm going to leave the rest alone. Now for backup this is the reason why I choose the native version. Microsoft actually takes care of everything for you. So they have point in time restore and long-term retention. So you don't have to worry about all these things. You will retain your database backups for 7 years. Microsoft has got you for that. Here they also offer redundancy. You don't have to worry about how you're going to have a redundant backup. The Microsoft tells you to select one of the four. They default this one because this is the most reliable one we have right now, where you have region-based backup. Local is basically what you're used to, one data center. Zone is two physical data centers in one region. And then Geo is one that I recommend, which is two physical data centers in two separate regions for backup. And this is like two in two and two. So this has two in one region, two in another region. Altogether, you have four. This is like if you want to be doubly redundant, then you choose this one. but we're not doing that today. We're just gonna go with the defaults. Uh, I recommend here for network connectivity, keep it as no access, or if you're in a corporate environment or enterprise environment, set up private endpoints, but do not make it public because then you get hacked almost immediately. Next thing is security. I'm going to leave the defaults for now. There's not much to talk about there. The additional settings is basically if you want to see the database or you want to set up backup. So this is where Microsoft gives you the option to set up your backup options. Nothing is set up here, but you probably have to set up one. You can learn more about setting up backup. They also give you an option to bring in a sample database here, which is AdventureWorks. If you wanted to get started with some data seeded into your system, you can do that as well. But in this case, we're not doing that because we already have our own data we're going to be bringing in. And tags are a way of billing. So when you every single resource in Azure that is not custom built do have tags. So what that means is that you want to tie in a cost center to your resource for billing. I'm going to create this, and then we can, while that's getting deployed, we can deploy this. What I like about Azure, you can do multiple deployments at the same time. You don't necessarily have to wait for something to finish. So I can go in here while that's kicking off and getting deployed. Go back to my resource groups here. I can actually create again. I'm going to create the service bus, which is the next one we're going to be doing. And hopefully by the time we've created the service bus, the deployment for the function app will be completed. So hit service bus here. Same thing, search for it in the marketplace. When you choose the first one that comes up, hit create. And we're going to go with the default. So namespace is basically HTTP because Service Bus uses HTTP connections behind the scenes. It does have other protocols, but HTTP is the one that uses as defaults, and you need to point it to same region. So I would say keep everything in the same region. Pricing is important because if you're using Service Bus, which is the messaging tool for messaging, you need to understand that the premium plan is for enterprise. I recommend if you're in an enterprise environment or you're planning to be in an enterprise environment, choose this option. You have unlimited messages. There's no throttling. We're going to see some throttling in here, but I know that, but I'm going to just go with the standard version. The advantage of using enterprise premium versus the rest is that you do have the option when you use premium to do what they call geo enable geo replication, which we talked about for SQL. This allows you to have redundant SQL service buses. So one region goes down, you still be up and running. So that's the reason why another reason why you're choosing that. If you notice when I switch it, you can't choose it. Well, this goes away. The other thing here, we're going to keep the TLS. Networking is going to be only available publicly because we've chosen not to use enterprise. If we chose the premium version, you have private access and you can set up you can lock it down even further for security reasons. And tagging again, very important for pricing. So we can create that. So this is going to create a few minutes to create. So while that's going, we can go back to close this out, our resource group. And anytime you're in doubt, just go into your resource groups like I'm doing and just click into the resource group itself, and you see all the resources in here. So when all that is set up now, we can go back to our function app and see how we're doing over on that side. The last time we set a CI/CD to push code into our environments. Uh, Everything looks like is green. So we have a couple of triggers in here. I mean, one of the things I want to talk about with function app is that function app are not just HTTP calls. They actually do a bunch of stuff. So you can see here that I have a trigger that actually is going to be used. We're going to call it a blob trigger that actually looks at files that get dropped in a container. We're going to showcase that. You have a couple of HTTP triggers here, which is basically what a REST call. So this is a REST call. This timing trigger is almost like a cron job or your batch job, similar to that. So it does support that as well. Then you have a service bus trigger, which actually is another trigger, which actually looks at the sub messages that are inside of your service bus, pulls those messages off. So, and this is just a handful of them. There's probably a dozen or more. I've seen roughly about a dozen different triggers, queues, as ones for Cosmos. There's a bunch of them out there. But I'm just using a handful of ones so I can actually get my for the requirements that I'm looking for. All right, so that was deployed successfully. So now we're going to move over to configuration, which is the next step. So if I go into my documentation, That's built fine. No issues. It was green. So we're going to go into, scroll down here. It's a lot of documentation. I'm going to focus. We're going to spend some time in here. So these are the things we've got to set up in our function apps so it can talk to the dependent systems. I went into the configuration tab here instead of the function itself. Then if you click on the environment tab here, and this is where we do all application settings or connection strings. There are already some pre-built ones that I put in here when we did, provision the function app. And then this one is already done, so we don't necessarily have to do that, but you can add all the remaining sys ones in here. So we're going to pick, let me close this window. We don't need this anymore. So, oops, scroll down. Sorry about that. Oops. We'll go back here. The mouse is acting up. Find where we are. Sorry about this. And then this is where we are. So expand it over here. This is where we're focusing on. So I'm going to grab this. Uh, this is location of where our config files are going to sit. So I'm just creating a placeholder here, which is called config. We'll later on get that configured when we get to storage account. API keys are important because we do need to secure our APIs to ensure that we're not introducing any I don't want to do that. That's not want to do the wrong thing. That's advanced. We're gonna have API keys so we can protect our API. So we call it XAPI. So every API call that we make has to have a corresponding key. This will not work. Then the app service, the app name is just basically a way of us tracking all the calls that we make within this function app itself through Log Analytics Workspace. And if you have time, look at that as well. I'm just going to give it a name here. 1218. Apply that. Then we have the storage account itself. We're going to point that to this guy here because we're just making a reference to the actual storage account itself so we can actually get to it. Because we don't own it, Microsoft does. Microsoft provision it for us on our behalf. So we want to be able to use it for extended capabilities, and that's how I get around that. So we're going to call it that. And we're going to go back here. Service bus connection string we don't have right now because we just is a brand new service bus we just provisioned. I'm going to leave this placeholder here. I'm going to open up a new tab and grab that information. Open up two tabs because I need to grab. I'm going to log into here. And I'm going to grab the connection string for service bus. So let's just go close that now. All right, so let's go into this resource group. So I'm going back to my resource group. My resources in them. And then I need to go into the newly provisioned service bus that we have